Welcome back, friends of poetry, friends especially of Morning Gym poetry, which this is. And we're going to have our final reading of the year 2022 coming up. And we're reading A Visit from St. Nicholas. Now, this shouldn't be this complicated, but let me just say that it was written either by Clement Clarke Moore, or if you prefer, it was written by Major Henry Livingston, an officer in George Washington's army. Both of these men were born in the 18th century, and they were both Americans who lived in the East, as almost everyone did at that time. And I don't know the answer to the truth of the matter as to who wrote it, but the controversy may have something to do with the offhand way much poetry was handled by both authors and newspapers, where most poetry was published then. And they printed much of the poetry just with an initial or anonymous as the title of it. And then later on, oftentimes, people took credit for their poems by publishing a book of poetry. And then it became revealed who wrote what. But it was a catch and catch can measure. So I'm going to read A Visit from St. Nicholas. And then I'll comment on why I picked that and what my history with that poem has been, because I think it's somewhat interesting. All right, here it is. A Visit from St. Nicholas. And I'm not going to say who wrote it, because that's still controversial, as I mentioned. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads, and Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when, out on the lawn, there arose such a clatter. I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew in a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with the little old drivers so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer, now Vixen. On Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all, as leaves that before the wild hurricane fly. When they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of his pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drew out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." As away he went on the clouds. Oh, that's a great poem. And we may never know who actually wrote it. My interest in the poem goes back a long way. It was the first poem I can remember hearing. And it was read to me and my brother by my father more than 80 years ago. And Dad, whose hobby was photography, in those fairly early days of photography, set up lights with a camera on a tripod and a time delay so that he could pop the shutter with a delay and then rush over and get us on his lap to read A Visit from St. Nicholas. I still have that photo, which I haven't been able to put my hands on yet. But maybe a year from now, when I read this again, which I plan to do, I'll have the photo of Dad reading his boys Visit from St. Nicholas. After the photo was taken, Dad continued reading, and we became more interested than the photo may suggest. I'll bet most of you, along with me, have had a first Christmas memory of some kind. If we can only revive it. It's even better if we could find the picture. Probably a good idea to write it down and tell it to your kids and grandkids. In most cases, memories create and connect families. Try it. Now let me just make a couple of comments about A Visit from St. Nicholas. Clement Clarke Moore actually published this poem for the first time. But the great-grandson of Mr. Major Livingston fought that interpretation, and it turned out that there was no evidence that Livingston had ever published it, even though there was evidence that the other guy had published it, but the claim of Moore has been challenged fairly seriously by scholars. Moore asserted that he wrote the poem for his own children and recited it to them on Christmas Eve, 1822. After it was published anonymously the following year, according to him, it became increasingly popular, appearing in newspapers, school readers, other anthologies, and many different single editions. The New York Book of Poetry in 1837, which was an anthology of works by New York poets, contained a visit from St. Nicholas. Although anonymous, was still listed as the author. Not till 1844, when Moore's collection of his poems went into print, that he claimed to have written this poem. But now authorship is typically attributed to Major Henry Livingston Jr., who lived at the same time as Clement Moore and was an officer in George Washington's army. Also had a bunch of children, just like Moore did. And he said that he had written it. He told that to his grandson. And then his great-grandson spent many years trying to establish Major Livingston as the author. Tracing down the real source of this poem has been an almost life's work for some scholars, but for a variety of complicated reasons, now, since about the 1940s, scholars are giving credit to Livingston, even though the poem is often published as being written by Clement Moore. And so the truth is, it doesn't make any difference. The poem is the same in both editions, either under the name of Livingston or Moore, and it's a great one. It's a great one. I'm going to let you go at this point with only one poem, because I can't think of another poem that brings memories to me like this one does. And I'd like to have you try to connect this Christmas with your children and grandchildren with some piece of literature, and maybe The Night Before Christmas would be a good choice. Tune in again in a week for more poetry. This is Morning Gem Poetry, and I'm Jim Ransom. Merry Christmas to everybody.